With so many options, why choose Arizona State University?
For me, the only online option was ASU because of the quality. Their faculty was really involved with their students and care about your personal journey. The dedication to my personal development from my professors, that's been extremely valuable to me.
Earn your degree from the nation's most innovative university. Online. That's a degree better. Explore more than 300 undergraduate, graduate, and certificate programs at asuonline.asu.edu.
This is Wheelbearings. I'm Dan Roth from Forbes.
And I am Sam Abu-Al-Samad from Navigant Research.
So welcome to episode 115 of Wheelbearings. We're going to talk about Goodwood. We're going to talk about the Hyundai Palisade. We're going to touch on a few other things. But the first thing we talk about every week is what we're driving. And Sam, you managed to get into a pretty nice chunk of British motoring this week.
I did. I had a chance to spend a week with the brand new 2020 Range Rover Evoque, which had its debut back in February at the Chicago Auto Show. And you know, so this is Land Rover's smallest vehicle that they sell in North America. Actually, it's the smallest vehicle they sell anywhere. It's the second generation of the Evoque. And when we first saw it back in February, or actually I guess we saw it before the auto show, it immediately it was clear. Yeah, it looks just like an Evoque, and but it's an evolutionary design in a really good way. And I think I touched on this when I talked a few weeks ago about the Range Rover plug-in hybrid I was driving. Range Rover in particular as a brand, from a design standpoint, it's a very interesting brand. Because, going back to the very first Range Rover in 1969 or 70 when it debuted.
Yeah.
And, if you look through to today, in a way, it's very much like 911. It's an evolutionary design where even that original one, that very first Range Rover, looked surprisingly modern, especially by British standards of the day.
Especially considering what it had underneath it, which was just basically all the running gear.
Yeah, but the design looked surprisingly modern. It was a fairly contemporary design that still doesn't look that old, even if you look at one today.
No, it was certainly timeless and classic. I mean, I'm having a little trouble seeing through the Evoque to that original Range Rover?
I'm not necessarily comparing that to the original Range Rover, although I'll get to that in a second. But each generation of Range Rover has been a fairly subtle but progressive change, and you can see that lineage from the Range Rover of today back to that first one. And it's a design language that has held up surprisingly well. And there's elements of that in the Evoque, although the Evoque, obviously, because it's a much smaller vehicle, it's got very different proportions. It's a lower roof vehicle. The big Range Rovers are tall roof vehicles. They have a very tall greenhouse to them. And the Evoque and the Velar as well, the midsize Velar, don't have that same kind of profile. They have a much lower roof profile. But there's elements of the design language, the glass that looks like it wraps all the way around the greenhouse, and elements of the lower body that you can see that family DNA in there. They don't look exactly the same, but and there's certainly a lot more connection between the Velar and the Evoque. But there's definitely a family DNA, and going from the first generation to the second generation Evoque, at first glance, it looks more like a refresh than a complete redesign. But when you start looking at it in more detail, you see a lot of details that have obviously changed quite a bit. The body sides, the horizontal character lines on the body sides are not as pronounced as before. It's more subtle. The door, it's got the retracting door handles.
Oh, like
from
the Velar, yeah.
So the body looks, the door handles are flush in the bodywork. Everything is a little bit smoother, a little bit cleaner, a little more refined. It's a very contemporary looking design, but it's also, because it's a smaller vehicle, it has very different proportions from the Velar and from the big Range Rover. It's a little more brutish looking.
Yeah, and they're doing the same kind of thing at their level that Jeep manages to pull off at its space in the market, where you look at the Compass, Cherokee, Grand Cherokee. There's definitely a resemblance all the way through, but they're not exactly the same. And it's the same thing. Like depending on what the wheelbase and the platform is, the proportions have to accommodate that. And they do what they do, and Range Rover clearly does the same thing. Like I'm looking at the Evoque now, and it's very clearly a Range Rover. The Velar. The first time I saw the Velar, I was like, "Wait, which model is that? Is that the Range Rover Sport?" I didn't realize what I was looking at until I looked at the badge, and I think that's a good thing that it's a Range Rover, but you don't know which one it is.
Right. Yeah, and I think it's a look that works really well. And then the Land Rover models, the Discovery and the upcoming Defender are obviously they are they're at least with the Discovery there's a bit more of a tie-in to the Range Rovers, but they have a little bit different look, especially in the greenhouse. You don't have that full wraparound glass kind of effect, but I think overall I think the design works really well.
Yeah, I agree. I hope that it works better actually than the original. The original Evoque was so stunning on the outside; it really brought that show stand thing to the street. I remember when it was the show car, and then when it debuted as the actual Evoque, it looks great on the outside. But it was so disappointing to drive that original Evoque. It was, it's hard to see out of it. I didn't find it that comfortable. The powertrain was kind of unrefined. To me, it felt like a Ford Escape.
Yeah. Well, the new Evoque is definitely much, much better in that respect. It's got the new Ingenium 4-cylinder engine. Well, let me touch on the interior. You mentioned visibility. Obviously the kind of chopped roof look, the chopped roof profile of the Evoque does have an impact on visibility, especially to the back. However, they do now offer what they call the clear view mirror, which is the camera mirror system, the same thing that you have that the GM offers on several models, including the Cadillac CT6 and the Chevy Bolt, which it has a camera that's mounted in the back of the shark fin antenna on the roof, at the back edge of the roof, and it projects on the mirror itself. So you can use the mirror as a standard reflective mirror, or if you flip the little lever on the bottom like we used to do to go from for night driving, for the headlights coming from behind you to dim that. Instead, that flips it to an LCD that's embedded in the mirror, and you see the display from that camera. And with the mirror, because you have a relatively vertically short, rear glass in the rear, in the tailgate, plus you have the headrests from the back seats sticking up and the pillars in the back. The visibility straight out the back is frankly pretty bad if you're looking through the mirror. But if you use the camera, now you have a completely unobstructed view all the way around the back, and it's vastly superior than trying to use the mirror, so you can actually see what's behind you. And then the rest of the interior, they've basically taken the same kind of look that's in the Velar and in the Jaguar I-Pace with the dual screen setup that those vehicles have. And the Velar's got the top screen flips up a little more vertically when it's off. The screen kind of lays back flush in the dashboard. When you turn it on, it pops up a little more vertically, and you've got your infotainment in the upper screen that's up on the dash. So your maps and your audio system controls and everything are in there, and then the lower screen is for your climate controls and seats and the vehicle controls, to switch drive modes. It does at least have rotary knobs for adjusting the temperatures and adjusting the seat temperatures, as well as for the volume and tuning. But the displays are these high gloss displays.
I was going to say that it's very pretty in pictures.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at that going, there's so much shiny stuff there.
Yeah, too much shininess there. When in bright sunlight, if the sun's shining in from the side, you do get some glare off of it. And worse, if like me, you wear polarized sunglasses, you get that rainbow effect on there, which, I swear every automaker needs to force their designers, the interior designers, whoever's selecting those screens, to drive around for a month or even a week with polarized sunglasses on all the time, before they're allowed to sign off on approving those displays. This is a real serious issue. And Toyota is terrible at this. Almost all of Toyota's screens have this problem. Same goes for Range Rover and Jaguar. The interface is okay. It's not.
Yeah,
great,
how is their
okay.
infotainment? Because it's the, what does they call it? A Jaguar calls it like In Control Touch Pro or whatever.
Yeah.
They call it Touch Pro here too. In Control.
Yeah, it's the same system, same interface. It's okay. It's not terrible. It is a touchscreen, which as I am wont to say is a bad thing in any car that you have to drive. But it's not the best and it's not the worst. It's kind of middle of the pack. It does support Android Auto and Apple CarPlay, which is good. So you can just use those if you prefer, which I did. And then the lower screen is a fairly simple, clean interface. A couple of tabs to switch between controlling your seats, controlling your basic climate control. Where do you want the air to flow, and which drive mode do you want to select. So it's things that you're typically not going to use as frequently, and because it does have two nice big round knobs for the temperatures. If all you want to do is adjust the temperature up or down, just give the knob a twist, and you don't have to mess around with the touchscreen.
Yeah, it's one of those things. Everybody's trying to do something that is both visually distinctive for that wow factor on the showroom floor, and then also isn't completely terrible to use.
Yeah.
So they'll either figure it out, or they'll all come together and standardize, or they'll be forced to standardize. I honestly think those last two are not actually going to happen. They'll figure something out eventually, or we'll just learn to adapt to terrible interfaces like we have in so many other places.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, I think it's probably going to be the latter.
Yeah.
For some reason, people just seem to like like these terrible interfaces. So
especially with such a high style brand, I think the pain is part of the experience.
Yeah, I mean, people complain about the interfaces, but then they still want touchscreens. A big part of why the interfaces are bad is because they're touchscreens.
Yeah. Well, it's, and I don't know what the psychology behind that is. Like, oh, it looks so sleek, and it's like, yeah, sleek is cool when it helps you, but sometimes sleek is not good. Sometimes you want some buttons.
Yeah.
And stuff, but now I'm going to sound like an old man, so I'm going to stop.
Okay.
But
so let me get to the powertrain.
Which did you have, the S or the SE?
I had it's the.
Or is it one powertrain for both?
It's the same engine. They both have the 2-liter Ingenium 4-cylinder turbocharged, but there's the P250 or the P300 variants, and I had the P300. In the HSE trim level, and the difference between the two is the P300 has it's the 48-volt mild hybrid system that's added on there. So that bumps the power up from about 250 horsepower to 296. Which is, and it's noticeable. I mean, it's a strong engine, and that engine, that 2-liter Ingenium 4-cylinder that they have in a whole bunch of Jaguar and Land Rover products now is an excellent engine. It's much more refined than the old 4-cylinder that was in the original Evoque,
which was not refined.
No, it was not refined. This is a good engine. It's got plenty of power, plenty of torque. Excellent drivability. Interesting thing with the 48-volt mild hybrid system is they have clearly tuned this so that the hybrid functionality pretty much only adds that extra 50 horsepower. and some extra torque, but doesn't really do anything positive for your fuel economy, because both the mild hybrid and the standard version are both have an EPA combined rating of 23 miles per gallon. The mild hybrid gets 21 in the city versus 20 for the base version, but it only gets 26 on the highway versus 27 for the base version. So essentially it's a wash between the two. As a mild hybrid, it does, shut down the engine, and it can shut down the engine when you're decelerating, at speeds as high as 11 miles an hour, and keep it off, when you're, so that rather than coming on while you're sitting there at an intersection, when you still have your foot on the brake, it can keep it off longer, so that even it's not until you actually start to move that it'll restart the engine.
Yeah,
it'll
feel
start to move on electricity and then restart the engine.
Yeah, it feels a lot smoother, right? Like
it's much smoother. But even in those instances where it does come on, while you're stopped and your foot is on the brake, it's also a much smoother restart. It's barely noticeable, in part because the 48 volt system, it's a belted starter generator, has a lot more power to crank the engine, and so it cranks it much faster. And you really don't notice that. You'll notice it. You can hear it when it starts up, but you don't really feel that shudder that you get with a lot of stop-start systems. So I'd say it's overall a benefit, even though you're not really gaining any fuel economy. You are getting some improved performance out of it, and some other advantages out of it.
So, in terms of your overall assessment, this is a very crowded segment now. The premium compact, I guess it's an SUV. So the premium compact SUV that's going to be used like a crossover hatchback. Does it do enough to really differentiate itself, I guess? It certainly looks like a Range Rover. It seems like it's dressed up inside like a Range Rover. But that was really the biggest issue I had with the original Evoque, was that it didn't feel like it other than the badge. And you had that issue with like the GLK and the X3 when they originally debuted. So we're into the second generation now. Have they managed to really make it feel like it belongs?
Yeah, it absolutely feels like it belongs in the Range Rover family. There's everything about it is better than the original. I'd say this is one of the best looking vehicles in the segment. It certainly drives well. On the road, I didn't really have an opportunity to go off-roading with it, but as a Range Rover, like Jeeps, they do have good off-road capability. And is it worth $67,000? I mean, they start at 42, which is not cheap, but it's not crazy. And the R Dynamic version, which is what I had, starts at 47, just shy of 47. This one was pretty much loaded with just about every available option. So it was an R Dynamic, four-wheel drive, HSE, P300. It had all the goodies, and I definitely appreciated the cooled seats. When we had 90 degree and 90% humidity days for several in a row, so that was good. So I would say if you're shopping in this segment, for a premium compact utility, if you're looking at a BMW or an Audi or a Mercedes that's comparably equipped, you're probably in that same price. You're in that same price range anyway. So it's I'd say it's if you're looking for a vehicle in that segment, it's a reasonable value. Yeah,
it is one,
and it's no more ridiculously priced than its competition.
Well, yeah, I mean, in this this segment, the stuff that really, really stands out, I think maybe the Volvo XC40 is the most distinctive. I don't know that it quite reaches the same sort of rarefied pricing heights that the Evoque can get to.
Yeah, the Volvo doesn't quite get there, but you can certainly get a very nicely equipped Evoque, for under $50,000.
Yeah, so we're talking luxury cars, so luxury cars are going to have a luxury price, and it's it is something that it fits in its family. It looks very distinctive. It doesn't look like everything else out there, so it's an option. And I hope that our friend Stuart Shore drops one in the New England fleet soon, so I can also try it. It looks a little stubby, but it looks like a Rover. It also
and I think the overall proportions work really well. Especially when you see it in person. I think it's got a nice chunky look to it. That looks like an SUV. That can go anywhere. But it's got that sportiness to it as well that the other Range Rovers don't have.
It also kind of looks like a Kia Soul.
No, I mean,
the new Soul. Maybe it's a stretch.
Yeah, it's a stretch.
Okay.
It's taller than the Soul. It's got a higher belt line. The proportions look quite different.
Yeah, that's
when you see it.
It's not as upright for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. The wheel. The wheels are a lot bigger. Yeah, you're not going to mistake this for a Soul.
Okay.
You might mistake it for a Soul, but I don't think anybody else will.
All right, I got away with not insulting Rover too badly. So I spent some time in a couple of Volkswagens this week, or the last couple of weeks. I had the Jetta GLI that I touched on, I think, the last podcast we did, just briefly. And, I will touch on it again just briefly. So it was the GLI S, which is a new model of the GLI, I think a new trim level for the GLI this year, where it's the cheapest way to get the GLI, and it feels like it's the cheapest way to get the GLI. And it's a weird contrast because I had the Tiguan right after that, and so you look around the interior of the Jetta, and it's fine. Especially given the price spread of the Jetta, it's such an affordable car, and it's a good car for the money. It's a good size for its segment. It offers a lot of value. It still drives like a Jetta, so it has some discipline and a solid platform because it's MQB now. There's not really much to complain about there. The things you can see when you look around the interior, there's lots of hard plastic, it's like almost reminiscent of 70s style vacuum formed stuff. Not
or say a 2012 Jetta, when they first launched the previous generation and decontented it. Almost beyond recognition.
I mean, it's not out of place though, given where the car is in the market. It's just, I'm a little surprised that you can see it, and maybe it's me knowing what I'm looking at more so than sort of Joe Blow consumer. But I look at it and I see okay, these pieces were clearly not that expensive to make. They don't look bad. They don't feel bad, but the interior is, to me, it's not a GTI in that sense, but again, this is a GLIS, so it didn't have nicer seats. It was just sort of like standard cloth seats. It was very comfortable. It had a DSG with the turbo engine, and so it was pretty lively. It did seem like it ran out of breath after a little while, so it was just good around town, like on back roads. But if you're gonna use it to sort of rocket up a on ramp or something, it doesn't have a huge amount of top end. It's not a deep breather. But the chassis discipline that you'd expect from a GLI is there. It's a good car to drive, and it's a good car to drive on a curvy road in a deliberate fashion, shall we say. I don't want to encourage anybody to to do anything untoward. It also has the new.
Our listeners would never do anything untoward.
No, exactly. We're very, very conservative folks here. We
have a very responsible audience.
Yes, absolutely. We go and we read to children at schools, and we I don't know, we help the elderly cross the street. Anyway, it's a good looking car. I liked the way it looked. I thought it was comfortable. It's a good size. It has a roomy back seat, really good trunk. The price is decent. This one didn't have a sunroof. It had sort of most basic version of their latest infotainment, which has a larger screen, but it's also like sleek. Like we were talking about the Range Rover. It's a shiny screen, and there wasn't nav or anything, so the functions are. The menu structure is a little bit crappy, but it's better, I think, than earlier VW systems. And the things that we missed for years and years in VW are here, like a USB port. That was nice.
Instead of some proprietary connector that you could only get an adapter to, I think a Lightning,
right,
or maybe even an old 30-pin Apple connector.
Yeah, you'd string together. Well, you'd go and you'd buy if you just need it for power, you'd buy the lighter thing that plugs in. But yeah, so it's a good car. I feel like while it's a good Jetta to drive in terms of being a driver's car, it's still not a GTI. And maybe that complaint disappears a little bit once you climb the GLI trim level and you get one that really is a GTI with a trunk. But for whatever reason, the GTI just leaves a better impression on me. And so if I'm spending my money, I'm going with the GTI, and I'm going with a manual. So there's that. I don't like the DSG. As good as it is, it's still like, I find it kind of snatchy in certain situations, like parking lots and stuff, where I just don't like the way it behaves. And I find it's kind of uninvolved. So I'd rather shift from myself. But yeah, I like the GLI. And then the follow-up with the Tiguan was interesting too, because the Tiguan, again, this was an SE, so it's not the highest trim level, but it really reminded me of a 90s BMW. And I realized that's sort of the impression that the GLI left too, is they both just feel like, like the E36 when it first came out. It wasn't a luxury car in the luxury sense. It was definitely a premium car, and Volkswagens always tend to feel like they are more premium, I guess, than their price usually that's on. They have been doing nice interiors and just solid platforms and good manners for 20 plus years now. So I always expect that when I get in, it's going to feel like most of an Audi. But what I liked about it was the ergonomics, other than the touchscreen, were simple in both, and the Tiguan especially, where it had leatherette seats that were very comfortable, and I could dial myself in pretty nicely. It was really unperturbed by road conditions. It soaked up bumps, but it also wasn't sloppy. It wasn't like the most powerful thing out there. I think they actually both share the same force number. It's the EA 888, which is
all the current VWs have that in there now.
Yeah, so they basically, I think they turn the wick on the turbo up and down depending on which model.
Pretty much, yeah, because you've got versions of it that produce like as little as 160 horsepower or 170, whatever.
Yeah.
In the base Tiguan.
Yeah, it felt like what I had.
all the way up to the 300 horsepower Golf R.
Yeah. Well, the Tiguan could have used the 300 horsepower engine. I mean, if it's me, but they just like the Tiguan didn't feel as cheap inside as the Jetta GLI. The Tiguan, the materials and stuff were nice. The design is really nice. There's ergonomics are very good and straightforward. And I was impressed that within that footprint, they've managed to fit 3 rows of seats. Although the third row is slightly
useless.
Yeah, it's slightly dismal. The dog liked it. I sat back there, and there's not a whole lot of space. And
for you to say that, that is,
I'm comfortable just about anywhere. Yeah, but access to it kind of sucks too. And I think that's one of the things. Like, even if you had a better third row situation, getting into it is just not good in something on a wheelbase that's more typical of a 2-row vehicle, and once you add some wheelbase to it, it's just going to be crappy to climb in from the back seat. They slide forward as much as possible.
Well, the US Tiguan now is already the long wheelbase version, because they overseas, particularly for China, they sell 2 different variants of it. There's the one that we get, And then there's a shorter wheelbase version, which is roughly the same wheelbase as the first generation Tiguan.
Right, the Tiguan.
Yeah,
what do
so
they call it now? The Tiguan Sport or Tiguan Classic? Or something?
Limited.
Yeah.
I think
you're right. I think it's Tiguan Limited. Which, I think that's. I get why they do it, but that decision just seems wacky to me. Like, because they look so similar. The new one looks better. It's definitely a little crisper, but they still looks like a Tiguan.
Well, I think the proportions of the new long wheelbase Tiguan, to my eye, looks a little odd because all of the extra length is in the rear doors.
Yeah.
So it does look a little odd. The other thing that, when I drove the Tiguan last year that kind of bothered me about it, is the steering wheel position.
What did you?
It seemed to me like the steering column was tilted up at a higher angle than it is in other MQB vehicles like the current Golf and Jetta and even the Atlas. And when I tilted it down, so like the fixed part of the steering column seems like it's tilted up and mounted higher than it is in the other ones. So when I put the steering wheel down to a comfortable position, it still felt too high for me, but it was also cutting off half of the instrument cluster.
Yeah, I ran into a little bit of that. I found a happy medium. I guess it didn't strike me as being so off, but I found that, like, hey, I really want the wheel. The top edge of the wheel is going to go right through the gauges. So, I compromised a little bit, but, yeah, I can see that. I thought it looked like, it's interesting you talk about the longer rear doors. I was looking at it out the window, and it really just, to me, it looks like a wagon. It's a family truckster, and that's fine. That's what it's going to be used for. But they have a wagon.
For now, at least.
Yeah. But the Tiguan was a little nicer. It had the carpeted door pockets that you find also in the Golf Sport wagon, funnily enough. It's just nice touches, and it's good to drive. We took it into the city. We drove it into Boston on the weekend, and it handled those streets just fine. Where some cars that can be a real test for their structural rigidity. It rode well. It was comfortable. It starts to get a little. It starts to tell you that you should knock it off once you get it above about 80 miles an hour. And sometimes if you're keeping up with traffic, you're doing 80 miles an hour. So it's not luxurious, but it's not bargain basement either. So I liked that sort of way it has a character about it. The Tiguan it's not anonymous, neither is the GLI. So they're conservative. It's conservatively attractive. It's just its competition is so tough. This thing's competing directly with the RAV4 and the CRV. So does that third row offer an edge or not? I don't really think it does, because if you're using the third row, you've only got 12 cubic feet of cargo space, which is not really enough unless you're just carrying people. But if you are carrying people to do things, they're going to have, bags. Even if it's kids going to school, right? Like, you probably don't have enough space for their backpacks with 12 cubic feet of cargo space. You fold that third row down, you get a better size. I think you get almost 40 cubic feet, like 37.6 cubic feet. So that's a little better, and that's really its sweet spot, is use it as a two-row SUV. If you have a dog, the dog can get the third row when the dog comes along. Otherwise, don't bother. I like that it has integrated roof rails. I actually thought that was a nice touch, because you can then you just have to buy the accessory carriers versus buying the whole system. So it feels well thought out. It's priced pretty well for being a family SUV. So it's a Volkswagen flavored offering in a hugely competitive market. I don't know how well they expect it to do, but it's a good refresh, and hopefully it can sort of just carve out its own space and live happily. But it definitely needs more horsepower. I was a little let down by the engine.
Yeah, that is the other big letdown. It needs, like the 211 or 220 horsepower version that you find in the Golfs and other variants of that 2-liter, because it's just not enough. Especially because it's heavier, it's bigger and heavier than a Jetta or a Golf. It needs that extra power, because otherwise, as it is, it feels weak, and then the engine's working harder, so that means that your fuel economy is not as great either.
I did not get great fuel economy. I actually got really good fuel economy in the Jetta. I think I was over 30 with that. They were both also a little bit loud. You get above 60 miles an hour, especially the GLI. It was a loud car. I didn't realize how loud it was. The Tiguan was a little better, but maybe it's just the quality of the noise too. I did not break out the sound pressure meter. But the overall impression I got was like, hey, these things roar a little bit on the highway. So
yeah, they do.
All right. Well, so that about wraps it up for cars. We could stay with Volkswagen. We could jump into the ID.R at Goodwood. They broke the record so well they broke it twice.
Yeah, the Goodwood Festival of Speed was last weekend, and this is an amazing event that I definitely have to get to one of these years before it gets banned or something.
Yeah, before they stop.
Yeah, you just get this bonkers collection of cars that show up there, to be shown off and to race up the hill. It's about a mile, just over a mile, I think about a 1.2 mile hill climb course, and you get all kinds of crazy machinery there. Sometimes people bring out retired Formula One cars. In fact, there was a 90 was it early or late 80s McLaren MP44, one of Ayrton Senna's old cars that was there. And then, of course, VW brought the ID.R, the beast that tamed both the Nürburgring Nordschleife and the Pikes Peak hill climb last year. It was the first car, I think, to get under an 8-minute run up Pikes Peak last year. And it's the fastest electric vehicle up there at all. It's got the overall record, faster than anything up Pikes Peak, in part at least because electric motors don't suffer from oxygen starvation at high altitudes. And so, yeah, you're right. They went out on Friday last week and set I think a 41.1 time up the hill.
Yeah, that was like Saturday.
Or Saturday,
and
yeah.
Sunday.
Which was about half a second quicker than the previous record. And then on Sunday, they went out and did it again and got 39.9 seconds, which is just insane for this electric machine.
So where do you come down on the complaints that the electric stuff is just not exciting? It doesn't have the sound and fury of a gas engine car, because I think that's just nonsense.
Well, there is something to the whole sound and fury thing. I've been going to races for... I was thinking about it earlier, in fact, because I'm here in New York for the Formula E race this weekend, and I saw here with Jaguar. I saw Bobby Rahal at an event there that they had earlier this evening, and the very first race I ever went to was a Formula Atlantic race. It was the only one that they ever ran in my hometown of Hamilton, Ontario. Around the streets of downtown, and after that fiasco, they never held another race there again. But I saw, that was the first time I saw Bobby Rahal race. He finished third in that race behind another driver you might have heard of named KK Rosberg, who won the race when he was still running Formula Atlantic before he went to Formula One and won the world championship there. But I've been going to races for over 40 years now, and something about the sound of race cars, and these days I mostly like to watch sports car racing, which is cool because you have a lot of different cars with a lot of different engines. They don't all sound the same. It's one thing to go to an F1 race or an IndyCar race where they pretty much all sound alike. At a sports car race, they all sound different. And I'll be watching electric cars racing around Brooklyn here tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. And there's driving an EV, with no noise, can be a very nice, pleasant experience. But I don't know what it's going to be like actually watching them race.
Well, I think that there's
certainly you lose some of the sensation of speed, I think, without the sound.
I know that it's very familiar when you've got all of those combustion events happening and an open exhaust and the roar of the intake noise and stuff. It's impressive, and I love it. Even just like
it's a visceral experience.
Absolutely, like you stand close to a race engine or something with a lot of cam and an open exhaust. You can feel the pulses. It's percussive.
When you hear a Trans Am Corvette blast past you, 850 horsepower Trans Am Corvette, or a Mustang or a Camaro or a Challenger, that just. You feel it as much as you hear it and see it.
And so that's what we know. There's been however many, 100 plus years of that now. Probably like 130 years of that now. And then some of those, like even before that, like big stationary engines are impressive in their own right, and steam locos that it all came from, also impressive. So you've got all that big machinery, right? Gulping air and making explosions and stuff, but there's still that sensation of speed and a visceral note to an electric motor and the gearbox working really hard. It's you can hear it whine. You can definitely feel all the energy going through it. It's not the same. I get it. It's different and it's not familiar, but I still think that it's exciting, and certainly watching the car just go like a shot is definitely exciting.
Yeah,
and I do think, like you say, Lo, because it's a different sound and quieter. It's maybe we're not sensitized to that speed, so you don't have the engine running at 8,000 RPM, and you don't have that auditory signal. So you just have to recalibrate what you're looking at.
Yeah, and I'll be interested to see what it's like to experience a race without having to wear earplugs. Because at other races, unless you want to go deaf, you definitely want to wear earplugs. The next time around we can talk about it again. Because I have not watched an EV race in person before.
But that's going to change.
After this weekend, I'll let you know. We can discuss it again. But the ID.R was not the only vehicle at Goodwood. Ford also introduced a Mark II version of the GT, of which they're only building 45 examples. And this is a track-only car, so it's like the Ferrari, KXX, and some of the other track day specials that they built, or the Porsche 935 that they're building. In fact, the 935 was also at Goodwood, as was the new 911 RSR for the 2019-2020 season. But the GT Mark II, they've shaved 200 pounds out of this thing. They've bumped the power up from 650 to 700 horsepower, and essentially given it the aero package from the GTE Pro cars that run at Le Mans. So you've got a lot more downforce than you do in a standard road-going GT. And this will be for people that just want to go out and play on the track. You won't be able to drive. You won't be able to register these for the street. It'll be slightly more expensive than a standard GT at a mere $1.2 million.
Yeah, that's still not. That's not ridiculous. I mean,
no. I mean, compared to some of these other track specials, it's not at all ridiculous. I mean, all of these things cost up anywhere north of $1 million. And there's plenty of other stuff that is far more expensive than this.
Yeah, it's Goodwood. Like, there was a lot to see at Goodwood too. There's like a rally stage.
Oh yeah, there's lots of vintage racing machines and road cars. It's an amazing.
It's
event.
really has it sort of changed and evolved and grown in popularity over the last, I don't know, 25 years or so? It seems like.
Oh yeah, it's definitely grown. This year was apparently the biggest crowd ever. Well over 100,000 people there.
Wow. And what did you think of? I want to get back to the IDR eventually, before we move off the topic. But what did you think of that Di Tommaso too? Like there was a little controversy where, I guess the Glickenhaus fellas felt like they got ripped off.
Yeah, there's a lot of similarities in the design. Jim Glickenhaus, felt that it looked a little bit too much like his Pininfarina P45, which he had built a few years back on a Ferrari Enzo chassis, and it certainly bears some resemblance to that. But then again, the P45 was heavily influenced by the P3 and P4 of the 1960s, which is why why they designed it the way it did. So yes, it does borrow a lot of themes, but it does a lot of things differently as well. But it's also borrowing from 50-year-old machines as well. So I think it's nonsense to complain about it.
Well, if there's one thing we do very well in the automotive segment is complain about nonsense.
Yes, we do. That's absolutely
and so
true.
That's what I saw with the IDR was that there were folks saying, yeah, the car's fast, but did you see the giant diesel generator that they're charging it up with? And that's actually false. It's running a synthetic fuel. The generators are modified and they're running a synthetic fuel, and it's like a whole well thought out system from sort of start to finish to reduce the environmental impact of the whole effort. I forget off the top of my head what the exact fuel was that it was running, but I don't know. Like I picked up only a little bit of that, but is that what we have to look forward to for electric car racing? Is just people pointing to the old trope about how it's actually dirty because of batteries and coal and diesel?
Of course, people are going to complain about it, just like they've always complained about ICE race cars. I mean, that's nothing new. Let's see. I'm trying to find the. It's running on glycerol.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a synthetic glycerol, which is a biodiesel byproduct that is a bit more environmentally friendly. So it's not running diesel. It's a diesel engine. I mean, it's a diesel cycle engine, but it's not using diesel oil as a fuel. It's running glycerol.
Yeah, and I mean, you can run a diesel on propane too. Like it's a very flexible engine in that sense. So, I was just impressed with that, where they had thought about it enough to say, like, yeah, we also need our charging system to be less filthy.
Yeah. And realistically, when you're going to an event like this, you need to charge these things fast, and you don't always have the infrastructure available to do it on site. So you have to bring along your generators. The same thing happened back in 2010 when Nissan first introduced the Leaf, and it was up for the Car of the Year award, North American Car of the Year award. And I remember, there was a bit of controversy. I don't know how much it got publicized. It was mostly within the automotive journalist community. The people that were there. Nissan brought out a couple of Leafs for the drive program, and because they were running these things hard all day long, they were running out in the countryside in Michigan, northwest of Ann Arbor, where they do their testing day, and they actually did bring along a diesel generator, a truck, with a diesel generator on the back, a big DC fast charging unit, and had that sitting in the parking lot, the staging area. And, after after every couple of laps around the drive route, they would plug it in, charge it back up, and be ready to go for the next one. So, sometimes these are the things you have to do. I mean, this is not normal operation. Right. This is not the way, average people are going to be charging their vehicle.
Well, yeah, and when it's a specific application like that or a specific use, like you as a observer or us as journalists, like we have to forgive some of that. Like they're giving us the opportunity to try the hardware in a really non-standard situation, and so they're doing what they have to do to make sure that we get the best representation of it. Can you imagine the PR if they given you a thing with a half-dead battery and crapped out and stranded you? Like so. Whatever. Look, I if I have to bring power to a location, I'll bring a generator truck and so I can run lights from one of my shoots. Like it's not a big deal. It's just it's something that you do.
I mean, in the grand scheme of things, the emissions we're putting out and the things that we do that are ruining the environment. This is peanuts. This is irrelevant.
Yeah, and we can talk about where the energy comes from when you're plugged into the grid, but overall, it seems like,
and that that actually is a significant issue. There's a lot of complaints about are EVs actually more environmentally friendly, and to a degree it does depend on what your electricity source is. If you look at the total life cycle emissions of manufacturing a vehicle, using it, and then disposing of it at the end of its life, the total amount of energy used and the total emissions to actually manufacture an internal combustion vehicle is generally less emissions and energy than manufacturing a battery and an electric vehicle. However, the electric vehicle uses so much less energy, over its lifespan compared to an ICE, and emits so much less or nothing that when you factor in the total life cycle, even when you're running off of coal, it's using less energy and emitting less over its lifespan than an internal combustion engine vehicle. And if you're running it off of renewables, then it's way less. The gap is a lot smaller when you're running on coal, but it's still generally better. And if you're running on solar or wind or hydro, then it's dramatically less over its lifespan.
So the answer, as with everything else, is a solid.
It depends.
It depends, right?
Yeah, it's a solid maybe.
Well, and at least they're trying. With Volkswagen's emissions history over the last 5 years, they need to make sure that they are on their game. So good.
That is absolutely
good
true.
For them. All right.
And speaking of that, maybe we should get into the next.
Yeah, story. Absolutely. Let's move on to the next one.
So Volkswagen, they've had a little emissions issues in the past few years, which actually worked out well for my bank account and funded the purchase of a new car to replace our old Volkswagen. But we don't need to get into that. But Volkswagen has made a huge commitment to building electric vehicles over the next 10 years. And now they're sharing some of that with Ford. Ford and Volkswagen have been in talks since last fall on various cooperations, various ways they can cooperate to try to reduce their costs. And earlier this year, we saw an announcement about them collaborating on commercial vehicles and trucks. And so Ford's going to get a pickup truck based on the next generation Ranger, and Ford's going to provide some vans that are going to be badged as Volkswagens going forward. And now Volkswagen is going to provide their MEB platform for an upcoming Ford electric vehicle for the European market. And that's just the beginning of the deal.
Well, that doesn't seem like a bad deal for either of them. These are two behemoths in the auto industry. Ford and Volkswagen both have a pretty large footprint. So it's not like two small players hooking up, right? It's really, it is big news, but it really says something when two companies that could probably pull the financing together and definitely have the capabilities to engineer a platform. Ford could make their own MEB competitor, no problem.
And they are.
So then why are they like? What do they get from it? I guess like it seems beneficial because they, Volkswagen gets scale and Ford gets the platform, and everybody wins. But if they're also sort of developing their own stuff on the side too, like why bother?
Well, that's a good question. Why is Ford continuing with what they're doing? Ford's not going to get this MEB vehicle. They're not going to launch this MEB vehicle till 2023. And right now it's just one model line, and it's only for the European market. There may be additional models coming, but Ford's already well along on development of their own platform. That's going to launch with this Mustang-inspired crossover Mach-E thing early next year.
And that'll be a global platform too, right? So that'll
be a global platform.
Yeah, I guess I missed that too. Like if it's just Europe, it definitely doesn't make any sense to do something that's just
well, except that MEB is a global platform. It's going to be used for vehicles that are sold in North America and in China.
Right, but if Ford can't have it globally, I can see how there's like, okay, if it's just for Europe and it's one it's the same as Volkswagen hooking up with Chrysler to do the Routan instead of the next, and another Eurovan. Like looking at the economics of going into that single market with a product versus rebadging somebody else's. I can see that. So I needed to think about it a little bit more deeply. That's all.
Yeah. Well, right now, it's Thursday night as we're recording this. Tomorrow morning, Friday morning, Ford and VW are actually making this announcement, and I'll be at the press conference in Manhattan for that. And then afterwards, I'm going to have a chance to talk to Joe Hinrichs, the president of Ford, to try to dig in a little bit more into the EV side of this thing. And so we'll have a better idea what their plans are after that, I hope. But there's also another part to this deal, so it's not just about electrification. It's also about automated driving. And this is actually the much bigger part of this deal, which is that Volkswagen has decided to invest in Argo.ai, which is the startup company that Ford made a big investment in early 2017. It's they're based in Pittsburgh. They launched in late 2016, led by Brian Selesky and Pete Rander and Brett Browning. And Brian's the CEO. He's formerly of Waymo. Before that, he worked on some autonomous mining truck applications for Caterpillar, and then he led the software development side of the Carnegie Mellon team that won the 2007 DARPA Urban Challenge with a Chevy Tahoe, an autonomous Chevy Tahoe. And Pete was previously at Uber ATG, and before that he was at Carnegie Mellon. And Ford bought a majority stake in Argo in early 2017, and Argo has been developing the production automated driving platform that's going to go in Ford's vehicles starting in 2021. Now, Volkswagen has also bought into Argo, and they will also be using Argo's technology in their upcoming automated vehicles. Ford's vehicle is going to launch first, but then VW's will follow at some point after that. So VW is investing $2.6 billion into Argo, $1 billion in cash, and then they are also adding in their AID group, which is their Autonomous Intelligent Drive group, which is based in Munich. That group is going to become Argo.ai Europe. So it'll be Argo's European division, and they will be merging their work. So the people and the intellectual property from the AID group will be part of Argo going forward. And so I think this is a real validation of Argo's approach to the problem, their technology, and the way they're doing this, the way they're developing this stuff. Because Volkswagen previously was working with Aurora, which was Chris Urmson's company. Chris was Brian's boss at the Google self-driving car project and Waymo before both of them left there. And before that, he also led the Carnegie Mellon team that Brian worked on. So that's a very capable company, but Volkswagen, for whatever reason, has decided to go with Argo. I guess they felt more comfortable with Argo, and probably part of it is by having a significant equity stake, they've got a little more control, a little more influence on it as well. A bigger stake. Putting their money into this rather than just getting a supplier to provide them with the stuff. They actually own some of it, and so Ford and Volkswagen each own the same relative share. The overall valuation of Argo has been set at $7 billion. They each own a minority stake, and together their combined stake is still amounts to a majority of the ownership of Argo, and then the Argo team owns the rest of it. Brian and Pete and Brett, and then their employees with their stock options own the rest of it. So this is a big deal because like you said, with the electrification, by combining their efforts together, they can spread out the costs over more vehicles. So instead of each of them spending a comparable amount of money to develop their own automated driving systems, now they can develop one automated driving system. They can both leverage that and get more scale more quickly, and reduce the overall development cost of the technology. And for Argo, they'll be expanding into Europe, and testing in more environments, and that'll help speed up the development of their system, hopefully. The same, so the same kind of principle applies to the EV side, with getting more scale from their development as it does on the autonomous side.
So what does Argo do differently? Like you mentioned that this sort of validates Argo's approach. What do they do differently than the other autonomous players?
At a fundamental level, it's not that different from the other leading players. They're all using multiple different types of sensors, radar, LiDAR, cameras. They did buy a LiDAR company last year called Princeton Lightwave that has some very interesting LiDAR technology, and they're going to have running prototypes of that on vehicles. Princeton had their systems that they were using in other applications previously, but they're going to have vehicle prototypes running later this summer. And one of the advantages to their to that LiDAR system is has the potential for longer range capability. So that means higher speed capabilities with the LiDAR. And just their I think their general approach to developing the software. From a hardware perspective, what Argo is doing is not dramatically different from others. But I think their approach to the software, is something that Volkswagen apparently liked a lot. They're doing a mix of AI type systems, machine learning algorithms, and more traditional deterministic algorithms. So rules based algorithms, using a combination of those as needed and mixing them in together, which gives you a way to better validate the performance of the system to make sure it's actually working. Because one of the things about machine learning systems is it's hard to actually understand what's really going on inside that algorithm. You can't just walk through the code and understand exactly, feed something in and know exactly what's going to come out. It's more of a black box. And so by breaking it down into smaller chunks and mixing and matching for the different parts, the different approaches to the software within that, where whatever is best for a particular function, you can have a system that should be more robust and safer and more reliable. And Argo is also doing some interesting things with one of the challenges around automated driving is the prediction part of it. So you've got to take the sensor signals and perceive what's going on around the vehicle, but then you have to predict what all those targets you're seeing around you, the other vehicles and other road users like pedestrians and cyclists, predict what they're going to do before you can plan your path to drive down the road. And Argo is doing some interesting stuff with their prediction algorithms.
All right. Well, I mean, more self-driving cars is going to push the state of the art. Hopefully, it doesn't come at the expense of the cars that we drive ourselves. I remain a skeptic,
and that's a good thing. There's nothing wrong with being a skeptic.
The other exciting thing that happened this week was, I think it was this week, maybe it was last week. Either way, it's been relatively short time since you actually drove the 2020 Hyundai Palisade.
It was actually about 2 days ago.
So 2 days ago. That's good. This is we've had, I think all of us have had experience with the Kia Telluride. And so this is the same vehicle. It's just the Hyundai version. So it's a bit more luxurious. It's also distinctively styled, as is the Telluride. They're visually pretty different. So that's a plus. And if the Telluride is any benchmark, the Palisade must have been impressive.
Yeah, it was very impressive. It's very quiet. It's very spacious. It's big. It's a full. They call it a mid-size 3-row, but I think it's really more of a full-size 3-row. I climbed into the back row, the third row, and it's I could sit back there comfortably. It's a little bit knees up position. The seat is fairly close to the floor, but I could still sit in there reasonably comfortably. I had enough leg room in there, enough headroom, and there's for kids, like for 8 to 10, 12-year-olds, early teens, you can fit 3 kids back there without too much difficulty. So you can have seating for up to 8 in there. This thing has a very premium feel to it, very premium look to it. Really nice inside, nice materials, especially on the limited trim level.
Quilted leather.
And only one powertrain, the 3.8 liter V6 with an 8-speed automatic transmission, front wheel drive or all wheel drive, and surprisingly fuel efficient. On the return leg, coming back to our starting point, we did some highway driving, averaged 26 miles per gallon with this thing.
That's great. I mean, consider it's the size of a Tahoe.
Yeah, almost, yeah. It's a little bit smaller, I think, than a Tahoe, but it's pretty close. It's got 5,000-pound towing capacity. The ride quality, the balance between ride and handling is surprisingly good. It's very, very level body control as you're going through corners, which I was driving with Stephanie Brindley, and she's driven the Telluride. I haven't driven the Telluride yet, and I'll be curious to discuss this with Rebecca next time, because she's also driven both the Telluride and the Palisade. But one of the things that Stephanie was mentioning about the Telluride is it's got a lot more body roll than the Palisade does.
Oh, that's interesting, because the Telluride, it's another one of those vehicles that lets you know when you've overdone it.
Yeah.
So that's interesting that the Hyundai is a little bit more level.
Yeah, talking with Trevor Lai, who's the product planning manager for SUVs at Hyundai, the approach that they took with the Palisade versus the Telluride. The Telluride is a little bit more traditional SUV kind of feel to it, and the Palisade, is a little more modern, upscale, more premium feel to it. So they tried to keep it a little more buttoned down, and I think it shows. It certainly looks way more premium than the vehicle it replaces is the old Santa Fe XL, the long wheelbase 3-row Santa Fe. This replaces that in the lineup, and
right. And so they go from something that was like fine,
yeah, it was okay, but
everybody was like, "What's that?" to something that is gonna, people are gonna see it and they're gonna say, "What's that?" and in a totally different way, because it really stands out styling wise.
Yeah, no, it does. It looks great, and one of the things, even though it's actually slightly smaller than the Explorer, on the inside, it actually feels a little roomier, and I think that's a function of, a couple of things. just kind of the way it's laid out, it feels like you have a little more space in there, and the greenhouse of the Explorer has a little more tumble home, whereas so that as you go up to the roof, the glass kind of tilts in a little bit towards the roof line, whereas the Palisade is a little more vertical on the sides. So it's a little bit boxier greenhouse to it, which makes it feel a little roomier and more open. Which is on paper the dimensions don't look that different, but just the feel of it does feel roomier. So it's an interesting
well, they
effect.
use a lot of horizontal elements in the interior too. I was looking at that design. A couple of wacky things too, though. The Telluride has just a traditional shifter. The thing you pull it back and it operates like shifters have for decades. The Palisade, on the other hand, has like a push button kind of thing with multiple buttons and stuff.
Yeah, it's kind of like Honda's approach, except that without having a mix and match of buttons that you push or pull, they're all just push buttons. Which I think is a better approach. Certainly more consistent than the Honda approach.
Well, see, I actually and I was surprised that I like the Honda's approach. It's different, but it makes sense. And what I like about it is that it's that combo of actions you need to take. So you learn very quickly that for reverse, I've got to pull that little, I've got to pull it back to get reverse. So it's a different action versus just stabbing a different button on the quadrant. So you can operate it without looking at it once you get used to it. And I don't know that that's the case with the Palisade.
Yeah, the Palisade is more like a lot of the other, like more like the Lincoln approach, where they're all push buttons. It's basically a row of push buttons with for drive, neutral, and reverse, and then park is off to one side. So it's sort of a T-shaped, horizontal, or a T tilted 90 degrees on its side with the park on the side.
All right. Well, we'll hear stories about people messing that up and the cars rolling away.
Of course,
I'm sure. What did you think of the video? So it has mirrors, right? Rearview mirror cameras that display in the instrument panel.
Yeah, the Genesis G70 also has the same thing.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize that. What did you think of that? It seems weird to me because you're going to be looking at the instrument panel. That's kind of a far way to look down off the road to see that display. It's neat, but it's also maybe not the best application of that. Yeah,
I think it doesn't hurt. It's kind of a similar concept to like the Honda lane watch system, where that they used instead of blind spot monitors. This one still has, the blind spot monitors, the radar sensors in the rear corners to alert you if there's somebody in the blind spot. But when you turn on the turn signal, it's using the cameras that are embedded in the mirrors that give you your surround view, but it's also looking back, to give you the view of what you're, if your mirrors are aimed properly, what you should be seeing back there in that blind spot area, with the cameras, and displaying it in the middle of either the speedometer or tach, depending on which side. So if you put on your left turn signal, it'll show up on the left side of the cluster, and the right turn signal shows up on the right side of the cluster. It's a little gimmicky. It doesn't hurt. I don't know how much it really benefits, but it's neither here nor there.
It's clever. Yeah. It's a because we can thing. So there's that. We're going to see more of that kind of stuff. They'll eventually find things that do work, and they'll get more widely adopted. And it's stuff like Lane Watch, Honda kind of discovered that while it works, people don't use it.
Yeah. Well, actually, it doesn't really work that well either. It's not really very useful because the Lane Watch system displays, it's only on the right-hand side. It's not on the left.
Yeah. And
it displays in the center display, so you're, instead of your audio system showing up, it switches when you turn on the turn signal, the right turn signal, it shows you the display from the camera on the screen instead of your infotainment. and it's really not good. Yeah, I'd rather
I got
have
to
a
the point
proper
where
blind spot monitor system.
I'd rather just set my mirrors.
Well, I mean, the blind spot monitor, is great for things. I mean, there's always going to be things that no matter how well you set your mirrors, there's going to be areas you might not be able to see, and it also gives you the benefit of cross traffic alert when you're backing out of a parking space, which your mirrors are not going to be able to do anything to help.
That's true. I do like cross traffic alert. I think that's a great feature. The other thing I like is, I think the last car I experienced this on was BMW, but they'll use the individual speakers in the audio system to play the tone. So if you've got something, if you're backing into a parking space or something, and there's an obstacle on the left in the rear, it's going to play the beep from the left rear speaker. And conversely, if there's something on the right side, it will play it from the right side. Like, that's something that it doesn't take any more cognitive load to figure out what it's trying to tell you. And I love that. I think that's super clever. So more of that, please, automakers.
Yeah. Well, the another approach to that is also, the haptic feedback through the seat that GM does, which I think is also an approach that works really well. It'll give you haptic feedback on one side or the other if you're drifting out of the lane, or if the blind spot monitor is detecting something.
Yeah. It's anything that you're providing information, but you're not asking somebody to decode it, where they really don't need to think. That's the way to do it. So, I'm sure, looking at the Palisade and looking at what everybody else thought of it too, like, we're going to predict that this thing's going to have a bright future. Yeah,
I think it'll certainly do a lot better than the Santa Fe XL did. I think it's going to be a strong competitor, and it's very aggressively priced. A maxed out Palisade is only I think it's like less than $47,000, which
that's such a good deal.
It's not as fast as a Explorer ST, but it also you're never going to get it over $50,000.
Yeah, and it looks like $1 million. That's the thing that great. They're really, really good at. So it looks like it costs a good 15 or 20K more, and that holds some water. So, all right. Well, I think that's all of our topics. You know where to find us for feedback. Hit us up, or we'll be recording a new episode, and you'll hear us next week.
All right. See you next time.